welcome to Videocast. This week we're going to do a special videocast on a journalist called Whitney Webb. We share quite a lot of her stories. She writes for Mint Press News. A lot of her stories are related to Israeli infiltration of the United States government and military. So my dad contacted me and said these stories are great. There's a great videocast that she's done that we've shared on our website as well. What I want to do is put all those findings into context and explain them in a videocast of our own, so it makes a lot more sense to people, basically creating the whole picture. So, of course, that's what we're going to do. So, Dad, take it away, explain to us.
In connecting Israeli tech companies, and a lot of people won't know this, but Israel is becoming a major global center for the whole tech, smart technology arena. And she connects these various companies into a vast web. And they are connected themselves into not just the Israeli government, but the Israeli military and intelligence networks like Mossad and the domestic version Shin Bet. And there is a particular military elite cyber unit called 8200 or 8200, whichever name you want to give it or pronounce it. And they are based at a place called Beersheba. Beersheba is where the Israeli government military intelligence has built a vast cyber center. And, you know, if you criticize Israel online, and you get the abuse back, a lot of that abuse is actually coming out of Beersheba. And this whole 8200 and other connecting companies and groups have set about taking control of this whole smart technology network, which goes under the name of the smart grid. And the area they absolutely focus on is something called cybersecurity. And that's very important and very relevant because when you are employed by the American government, the American military, the Pentagon, the American intelligence network, and whatever like that around the world, when you are writing programs to secure computer systems, you have to have access to everything. The whole system in all its detail, all the passwords, the codings, everything. And there's another area which connects into this, which I talk about in my book, The Trigger, where I go into this in great detail, which is called enterprise architecture. And that means that you can have ongoing real-time access to these computer systems. And through the codes that you write in the cybersecurity area, you can put back doors into these systems through which you can access them. So you write a cybersecurity program for, say, the Pentagon or the White House or whoever, and you can write into that program hidden back doors which allow you to have ongoing access to that data in real time. And as I describe again in great detail in The Trigger, this is fundamentally how 9/11 was pulled off, not by 19 Arab hijackers who were supposed to fly wide-body jets when they couldn't fly one-engine Cessnas, but by hacking in through these back doors in the way I've described into the computer systems of the American government, the Pentagon, particularly the Pentagon response system to hijacking through an organization called NORAD, and also access to computer screens being seen by the civilian aviation administration air traffic system. And the control was such that in real time, they had the ability to put blips on the screen of planes that weren't there and take blips off the screen of planes that were there but were no longer visible. This is the scale of manipulation potential that we're talking about once you can put these backdoors into these systems. So what Whitney Webb has been writing about at length is how these Israeli cybersecurity companies that operate as one web and then lock into the military intelligence central core like 8200, how they have been accessing fundamentally important computer systems in America, other countries as well, I'm sure, and having this backdoor access. And what I wanted to do today was put this into a bigger picture of why it's happening and where it's planned to go. And to do that, we have to get through this whole idea that what I'm talking about is a, quote, Jewish plot. You hear some people say it's a Jewish plot, it's the Jews. It ain't. What it is a secret society cult that I expose in detail in the trigger, which has hijacked the Jewish community. It's also hijacked Saudi Arabia. It's hijacked the Vatican and Roman Catholicism worldwide because it specializes in infiltration, in appearing to be one of the group it's infiltrated, appearing to be a supporter of the group or culture or community it's infiltrated, and manipulating itself into the leadership of these cultures, countries and religions, and yet not pursuing an agenda to the benefit of that it's supposed to represent, but for the benefit of the cult and its long-term agenda. Just very briefly, you can pick this story up in the 17th century with a guy called Sabbatai Zevi, hence Sabbatean, and he claimed to be a Jewish Messiah. The Jewish Messiah had come. And he operated in the Islamic-controlled Ottoman Empire. And he built up for the time, a massive following. And by the way, what I'm saying here has come from Jewish sources, people in the Jewish community who have realized they've been infiltrated and taken over and have tried to get that information out. So the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire says to Zevi, you either basically convert to Islam or we'll sort you out. So he did. And a lot of his followers did. And they became known as the Donme, which means to turn. And they operated as if they were following the Islamic religion while they were following the cult of Sabbatai Zevi. And what this cult does and did is to invert everything. And it inverted traditional Judaism in the sense that if it was a fast day in Judaism, in Sabbateanism, as it was known as then, it would become a feast day and so on and so forth. Everything got inverted. And if you look at the world in general today, what do you see? Constant inversion. So he eventually died, and in the 18th century, along came a guy called Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank, hence it became Sabbatean Frankism, claimed to be the reincarnation of Zevi and of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And he took Sabbatean Frankism onto a whole new level and depth of depravity and orchestrated the infiltration of the Vatican, for instance, and so many other areas, including the Jewish community. And what they do is they pose as if, you know, we're Jewish and we are supporting and representative of the Jewish community when they're not. In fact, if you look at the background, they actually hate Jews and yet have infiltrated and taken control of that community, while the community in general believes that they're one of them. And people talk about the Illuminati, part of this vast web of manipulation, and the Bavarian Illuminati, which was created in 1776. So who created it? Well, Jacob Frank, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who was the founder of the Rothschild dynasty. He changed the name from Bauer to Rothschild, and Adam Weishaupt, who was the front man for the Bavarian Illuminati. And they were Sabbatean Frankists. They were part of this cult. So if you look at the inner core of the Rothschild dynasty, they are Sabbatean Frankists, not Jewish. But they hide behind that, not least so they can manipulate events from the shadows, but also because it gives them cover. Because anyone that gets close to them, increasingly now, you're anti-Semitic, you're anti-Jewish. When people like me are actually anti-Sabbatean Frankist cult, which is a very, very different thing. And if you like, the holy book of Sabbatean Frankism is the Kabbalah, a particular type of Kabbalah. And the foundation of that is a work called the Zohar. And the Zohar, word Zohar, means radiance or illumination. And that's where the whole Illuminati the theme comes from. And of course, the Kabbalah is the esoteric, what some people would call occult, word that just means hidden, book of Jewish mysticism, etc. But they follow the Sabbatean Frankists, a particular version of it. So as the decades and the centuries passed, this Sabbatean Frankist cult started to expand its power as they infiltrated more and more areas. And I have a chapter in the Trigger called Atlantic Crossing, and that's describing how this Sabbatean Frankist cult moved in on America and infiltrated the intelligence network, CIA, etc., what is now known as the deep state with the Pentagon and so on, and also government administration. And this is where this fundamentally close relationship comes from between the elite in Israel and the elite in America and the American administration. I mean, they own Donald Trump quite demonstrably. He gives them everything they ask for. And it's not the Israeli people and the American people. It's different arms of the same cult. You know, the American government gives Israel more foreign aid than any other country in the world, and it's just a smear of land in the Middle East by comparison to the rest of the world. It gives them, for instance, $3.8 billion a year in military aid, a lot of which, as Whitney Webb points out, is actually spent on advancing this cyber control of this whole smart arena, including the infiltration of American computer systems. The point is, however, I hear people say, "Oh, yeah, the American government it gives the Jews $3.8 billion a year." No, it doesn't. You know, when you talk to people in the Israeli Jewish community in Israel, they are suffering deprivation and oppression by their elite in the same way as in other countries around the world. It's not the rank and file Jewish Israelis that are getting the 3.8 billion. It's the Sabbatean Frankist elite that controls Israel and suppresses the people of Israel in the way I've described, just as it does in other parts of the world. So here we have this cult, actually a death cult, if you go deep enough, which infiltrates different communities, poses as them, and in the public arena, in the way the media describes the world and reports the world, you have this group, different to this group, different to this group, different to this group, and everything apart from everything else, when if you go deep in the shadows, this cult is controlling that group, that group, that group, and that group by posing as that group when they are really all together seeking to advance a particular agenda. And one of the themes, of course, one of the things that this Sabbatean Frankist cult, some of them believe it. I think the inner core don't believe it, but it suits them as a way of manipulating what they want, which is global control. They talk about the fact that the day is coming when the Jewish Messiah will arrive. And of course, with the background to Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank, you can see the connection between Sabbatean Frankism, the cult, and the whole Jewish Messiah belief. They say that a world ruler is coming, a Jewish Messiah that will control the world, rule the world out of Israel, Jerusalem. And when you look at that before recent times, you would obviously say, that's bloody mad. That could never happen. How could that possibly happen? That's ridiculous. But now, as you start to see two things, one, the emergence of the smart grid, which is that's why all this technology and ways of doing things now, everything's called smart because it's all connected to this grid. The idea is that everything eventually is controlled by artificial intelligence. This is where the Internet of Things comes from, where all these devices, right down to your fridge and whatever, are being connected to the Internet. But also, if you take it further, you see that people like Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive in Silicon Valley, and others are talking now openly about the day coming. He gives the year around 2030, but coming, when the human brain will be connected to artificial intelligence and to this smart grid. Now, whoever controls centrally, as this unfolds, as they describe, the smart grid, will control everything connected to it. Ultimately, as they talk about, eventually the human brain via AI. In other words, AI becomes human perception and not human thought and emotional response that we take for granted today. Now, add that to the fact, going into Whitney Webb's work, that this vast and it's moving so fast, this vast and ever-increasing connection, network, web of Israeli cybersecurity companies and other cyber companies connected as they are into the Israeli military and intelligence network through Unit 8200 and Mossad and Shin Bet. And the fact, and I've quoted Netanyahu at some length at a point in the trigger, and all I'm doing is simply publishing what he said about the intention to basically become number one tech center in the world. So we have this Beersheba military complex, cyber military complex, all around it now, and increasing all the time again, are the research and development centers of major Silicon Valley corporations, all the big ones. And the idea, I suggest, having researched this at great length, is that the plan is that the center of this smart grid will be Israel. And from that control potential comes the ability to control everything. And so I would emphasize again, am I saying that this is a Jewish plot on the world? No, I'm not. I'm saying the opposite, in fact. What I'm saying is this Sabbatean Frankist cult, which has infiltrated and taken control of the Jewish community, as well as others. I mean, the Saudi royal family, if you follow their story back, they are Donmeh. They are infiltrators, which have taken control of Saudi Arabia with the help of the British and the Americans, of course. Sits back in amazement, can't believe it. So just because we see certain things on the surface and certain people appear and groups and countries appear to be in opposition, doesn't mean at the level of the cult that they are. They're working as one unit. And so suddenly the ability for a, quote, world ruler symbolically out of Israel becomes more and more credible and possible if the control of this smart grid is eventually located in Israel, which is where it's currently going. They have a tremendously detailed program in Israel of picking out cyber people, cyber talented people in the universities. When they go into the military under conscription, they then go into these cyber units and they develop skills and they develop knowledge of systems being developed by the military. And then and this is not me speaking, by the way, I'm quoting people like Netanyahu here and others. They then leave the military, quote, and they go and they start their own companies, or they go into companies already there in places like Silicon Valley. And Israel is now known as the startup nation. In fact, there's an organization called Startup Nation Central, I think it's called, which is funded to the tune of tens of millions of dollars by Paul Singer, who is a major, they call them vulture capitalists in the United States. And this is funding tech companies starting up and then becoming major players in the global smart cyber world. So this is how what Whitney Webb has been talking about connects into the bigger picture of this attempt to create this global centralized dictatorship that I've been writing about for 30 years. I'm talking about this cult that's infiltrated the Jewish community, as it's infiltrated Saudi Arabia, as it's infiltrated the Roman Church. The Roman Church is the relocated Church of Babylon anyway, if you follow the history back. If you look at, take the Jewish population of the world in totality, it's about, officially, 0.2%. 0.2% of the population. of the world. Then you look at the Jewish population in America, which is 2%. You look at the population of Israel in totality, and it's about 8 million. 8 million in a world heading rapidly towards 8 billion. So then you ask the question, why does Israel, its government and its military, etc., and its networks in America like AIPAC and all the other organizations that come from that, that very much are involved in the manipulation of American politics, etc., big time. You ask, why could 0.2% of the world population have so much influence? I mean, Israel this, Israel that, oh, anti-Semitic that. I mean, it's every bloody where. Well, the answer is this cult. Because all that is orchestrated by the cult. And this cult, when I'm talking about those in full knowledge of what they're doing and what they're part of, is actually a tiny fraction of the 0.2%. But what happens is because they pose as Jewish and supportive of Jewish ambitions, a lot of Jewish people who don't even know there's a cult, let alone it's taken over their community, support it because they think it's the right thing to do, to support Israel and what Israel wants. But it's not what Israel wants, ultimately. It's what the cult wants that I'm talking about. And so you get these multi-billionaires that have funded this web that I'm talking about, and they control Silicon Valley. The idea is to move the center of power to Israel, but they control Silicon Valley now. This is the force that's behind all the censorship, because what you don't want is the ability of people to research and uncover what you're doing and then communicate it to people. You want the censorship kicking in to make sure that as few people as possible ever hear that information. And if you look at your Facebooks and your Googles and your Google-owned YouTube, etc., the influence of these on the face of it, Zionist Jewish organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, etc., in America, are absolutely fantastic. But they're not representing the interests of Jewish people. You see this in a clear fact that Jewish people that criticize Israel, although they may not realize what they're criticizing, they're actually criticizing this cult that's hijacked Israel and was behind, indeed, the moves to create it. Look at the Rothschild involvement in the creation of Israel. You'll see what I mean. When Jewish people criticize Israel and its actions, they are abused by this network out of the Israeli government military intelligence network far more vehemently than non-Jewish people. Because with people who are Jewish, they have a problem. They try, bizarrely, even so, but they have a big problem casting them as anti-Semitic. Like I say, they try. People have been thrown out of the Labour Party who were Jewish for being anti-Semitic, for criticizing Israel. This is how ludicrous it gets. But you see the constant theme of, if you're Jewish and you criticize these people in the Israeli hierarchy and elite, then you get the treatment more vehemently than if you're not, because it's much easier for them to cast the aspersions on non-Jewish people as, oh, you're just anti-Semitic. My belief is that we're all points of attention within the same infinite flow of consciousness, and all the labels we give ourselves are just experiences, transitory experiences. So my philosophy is the ultimate non-racist and the ultimate non-label and non-judging people by label. So I'm not talking about the Jewish community here. I'm talking about that which has hijacked the Jewish community and Saudi Arabia, and increasingly, or more than increasingly, the American administration and others around the world as well.
You've got a saying, which you say quite a lot, which is if something comes from nowhere and it's suddenly everywhere, it's the agenda. Now the smart stuff, I mean, you'd have a little smart car, that probably appeared quite a few years ago, but now everything's smart. It's an absolute explosion. Like you said earlier, fridges, phones, tellies, everything's smart, smart watches, cars, everything is smart, smart roads, the whole shebang, smart motorways and stuff, the death trap that they are. A friend of mine actually said to me a couple of days ago, he said that EDF Energy had been on the phone to him every single day for 2 weeks trying to get him to install a smart meter. So they're absolutely pushing it. What that should be is one phone call. Do you want a smart meter? No, I don't, mate. Phone down, done. Every single day for 2 weeks. So the pressure is there and they want you to do it. And there is a bit of resistance to it, like my friend's not getting one. And I'm thinking, and I wanted to have a little chat about it, something comes along then that suddenly stops that resistance. And that's where I'm thinking coronavirus has come from nowhere. Now, a lot of the responses to coronavirus are based in technology and smart technology. Is there a link between the two? Because from where I'm looking, it's a bit convenient.
I don't believe for a second that it's actually appeared naturally. We have a heck of a lot more to know about it, but on that, I'm absolutely in no doubt, just looking at things. But I'll come round to that in a second. What it's worth doing is just describing what this smart grid is supposed to be and how all the time we're moving towards it. The plan is that everything, and I mean everything, will be controlled by artificial intelligence, which will be controlled centrally. And let's take vehicles, for instance. We are having this, alleged debate in Britain about something called smart motorways, what Americans call freeways. And what used to happen is that there were lanes that were live with the cars moving, and then there was a lane on the left called the hard shoulder, an emergency lane. And if you your car broke down, you got into that emergency lane, so you were out of the danger of all the cars coming behind you and the lorries and the buses, etc. What they're doing with these smart motorways is they're taking that emergency lane out, and it's killing people. Well, it wasn't predictable, was it? Because people are going, have nowhere to go now. If the car breaks down, they go into the left-hand lane, but the left-hand lane's now a live lane, bang, when you stop. And they're still pushing this, despite all the deaths, for a simple reason. There is an agenda for the world. And people who resist this, well, they can go on resisting it, but the constant, incessant movement of events and situations, eventually not even they are going to be able to deny it. These smart motorways are being created not for vehicles as they are now, but for autonomous vehicles where a computer drives it and not the human. And this obviously creates a situation where if the computer is encoded, and it will be, it is dictating where you can and cannot go. At the moment, with a petrol vehicle, you drive it to where you want to go. But when a computer's driving the car and is encoded not to go to the places the system decides that the population are not going to go anymore, the car will literally not take you there. And this whole smart grid is about control right down to connecting AI to the human brain. So AI becomes human thinking and what will then pass for emotion. And we're seeing this moving forward all the time. And what they're creating is something known as a technocracy. People say that the manipulation, for instance, of the human-caused climate hoax is to justify centralization of power to create a fascist stroke communist global state. Fascist, communist, different names for the same tyranny, really. And that is true on one level, but the technocracy is something slightly different. The technocracy is defined in the dictionary as a form of rule which is conducted by bureaucrats, technocrats in all their forms, scientists, engineers, etc. And the idea is to create a technocracy, which in the playing out will be a global fascist communist state of centralized control, yes, but it will be done via technology and artificial intelligence. And what has to go for a technocracy to be installed is what we today call democracy. And so what we refer to as democracy is being targeted all the time. More and more reasons for things to be done without democratic oversight or without the people having a say. I mean, you look now, Gaz, at the control of global society and the information we receive or don't receive that is in the hands of Silicon Valley corporations. It's much more powerful than government. Most government doesn't even understand what's going on in Silicon Valley. And so we're seeing the technocracy moving forward all the time. And anything that can create a problem which suspends democracy, if you like, and has authoritarian impositions to meet the problem, is stepping us further towards what they say in their own documents is the post-democratic society. And so if you look at human-caused climate change, the hoax, people say, why would they hoax climate change? Simple. Create the problem or the illusion of one, which it is, and then offer the solution to your manufactured problem or illusion of a problem. And so when people are saying there's a problem, okay, what's your solution to the problem? And in the solution will come the understanding of why we have the problem. So you look at Extinction Rebellion and the Green New Deal in America, and what you're looking at is a agenda for the control of the fine detail centrally of people's lives, right down to what they eat or don't, to meet the problem of human-caused climate change. And that's why we have the hoax, so that solution can be put forward, which it is being. So then you look at the coronavirus, which you mentioned, and it ticks every box of a problem reaction solution to justify centralization of power and draconian imposition to meet the problem of the virus. And if people say to me, well, what else can they do? They've got to isolate people and they've got to have this lockdown and that lockdown to meet the problem of the virus. Okay. But why do they have the ability to do that? And for the public overwhelmingly to support it? Because of the virus. You see, once you release a virus, basically there's a chain reaction that takes care of itself. Because if you can get people frightened enough of it, then you are going to have the ability to basically do what you like in terms of draconian imposition, because people will be saying, just do anything, whatever, just protect us. So all you have to do basically is introduce the virus, and bang, the chain reaction will take you in that direction. And in China, for instance, and this is saying something, because China is already a technocracy. They have millions of cameras in cities, face recognition cameras. They can track anyone within a few minutes. They have a social credit system where, and this is all, of course, through the surveillance system, logged and tracked. When you act in ways that the government wants, you get social credits. When you don't, you get them taken away. And when you reach a certain level of them being taken away, you are banned from flying. You are banned from going on trains. There are consequences. This is how the technocracy is supposed to work globally. And this is why I've been saying, Gaz, all these years, if you want to know what's planned for the West tomorrow, look at China today. It's not an accident that this virus is said to have come out of China. And even by their extraordinary standards of technocracy tyranny up to this point, this virus has allowed them to go even further in control and imposition of the public. And like I said in the chat we had a couple of weeks ago about the coronavirus, what happens is these things are introduced, but when the time is past, when the virus starts to dissipate, they're already claiming it is in China, but who knows, then what has been imposed as a result of the virus is not totally rolled back. So we're another step forward towards this technocracy. And you rightly mention how many AI technology solutions are being put forward to meet the challenge of this virus, as they say. And what you're going to see is this theme of, well, look, we've got through this, but it could happen again any time. So what we have to do now, and it will be more imposition, and it will be technologically based, and it will involve more and more fine detail surveillance of people.
You spoke since the 90s about a microchip population, and this is another thing that's been mentioned quite a lot surrounding coronavirus, that if you had a microchip within yourself that could sense essentially a virus, then you'd know, and it would, you could isolate yourself and it would stop it spreading, because a lot of people have probably spread it when they didn't realise they had it. That's something that's being spoken about quite a lot, and people that I know, that are generally quite switched on, are kind of open to it. Whereas if you'd said to them 10 years ago, we're going to put a microchip in you, they'd have told you to jog on. And there you have it again. It's the situation of, right, well, the virus is the reason why. So where did the virus come from then?
Microchipping people to connect us to outside technological sources of information. I mean, what is Wi-Fi, which is full of the information of the entire bloody internet? It's a radiation field. You can access people. One level of the human body is a radiation field. And you can access these fields through technological frequencies if you know what you're doing. This is why 5G is so potentially lethal and significant in not only affecting human health, but manipulating human psychology. And the 33rd degree of Freemasonry has a motto: order out of chaos. Chaos is the currency of the cult. They create chaos, which means the status quo, how things have been, is gone. And out of the chaos comes a new status quo. This is what they do with wars. Wars destroy status quos, and afterwards they introduce another status quo. Then they have another war, they destroy that status quo, and they create another status quo. And with every status quo transformation, they're going closer and closer to the technocracy, global, smart grid, human control system. And when you've been researching this for 30 years like I have, the world becomes an open book, because if you know where they want to go, the daily steps towards where they want to go become absolutely obvious. And this coronavirus has the potential for a big leap forward in where they want to go. And, we're seeing this theme even before the coronavirus. We're seeing this theme of mandatory vaccinations. The moronic people in the British government are now contemplating this, they say. They're not contemplating it, they're planning to bring it in. And if you want access to the human body, well, there's two ways to do it very efficiently. One is through the water supply, which everyone drinks. And the other is through vaccinations. And I think that in terms of this coronavirus, in relation to this cult, we need to be very, very skeptical about a vaccine for coronavirus, for which there will be enormous pressure and enormous public support to make compulsory, or at least shun and have consequences and sanctions against those that won't have it. And we need to be very wary and ask ourselves, what's in it? No, not what you're telling us is in it, what's really in it. Because it would be the opportunity of a mass global vaccination program to get access to the body. And when someone says, we are going to tell you what goes in your body and what doesn't, there's a word for that: fascism.
It's interesting as well, going back to our earlier conversation of the work of Whitney Webb, that it's Israeli scientists that have got the vaccine for coronavirus over here. That's just a coincidence, though. That it's Israeli scientists.
Also, the Israeli government, which I say is the Sabbatean Frankist government, and said that they had been using coronavirus as a way of testing technology, and that they had, as a result, got further along the road to a vaccine for this virus. One of the scientists said it was pure luck that we were working on the coronavirus. Well, some people might believe that, some people may not. But wherever the vaccine comes from, we need to be very, very wary, because what is an absolutely massive, blatant, obvious problem, reaction, solution: the virus, the fear, the vaccine. And I, for one, won't be bloody having it. That's for sure.
No, not at all. Me either. There's a lot of censorship surrounding coronavirus already, and it's only been around 5 minutes, and already a lot of basically all the tech giants in Silicon Valley are jumping on any conversations about coronavirus, any stories about coronavirus. If people are posting stuff, a friend of mine posted a story about taking a lot of vitamin C and vitamin D as well, and they were covered with the fake news film that they now put on stories on Instagram and stuff like that, saying that that's not true. So they're controlling that, and that's another way, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that the cult itself protects itself from exposure by Whitney, by yourself, by others, is by censorship. And well, with the cult, calling you an anti-Semite as well is another one.
The perception that people have of this virus, whether it's true or whether it's not true, is what's driving behavior. And you have a simple little sequence. Information becomes perception, becomes behavior. So you have to control information. not just the information you give people to bring about the perception, thus the behavior that you want, but you have to stop other forms of information that challenge your information that would give people the opportunity to have different perceptions and therefore have different behavior. So controlling information, which is in effect, in most people, controlling perception, is a fundamental bottom line for this cult. And if you look at where most people today get their information from, it all goes back to Silicon Valley. And that's not a coincidence. And the censorship of information about the coronavirus was talked about in this simulation run by the World Economic Forum, this real center of the center 1% organization that has its meeting in Davos every year. The World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, don't start me, ran this simulation 6 weeks before the coronavirus came to light. And they were running the simulation on how the world would react and how the authorities would react or had to react to a coronavirus outbreak. I mean, talk about bloody prophecy. And one of the major areas that was discussed in this simulation, which you can see online, it was filmed, was controlling information about the virus and targeting what they call anti-vaxxers, because the punchline of this virus is very likely to be the vaccine in the end, as well as so many other benefits for advancing this agenda in all its forms that I've been talking about.
I read a story, or we shared a story on davidicke.com from the Activist Post, where they were saying that actually the biggest problem for humanity from this virus is the reaction to the virus. It's not the virus itself. And obviously the mandatory vaccinations is number one, isn't it? That's the main thing they want.
We can only look at things as they are at the moment, and China is claiming that they're starting to flatline on it now. But I would ask people, just look how many people die of heart attacks every year. Look how many people die of cancer every year. Look how many people die in road accidents every year. And it would put it into some kind of perspective. That is no solace for those who die, overwhelmingly old people and those with other health problems from this virus, as we're told. But it does put it into some kind of perspective. If it was about protecting people, then a lot of other things that take people's lives would be addressed with the same vehemence. Things that take more people's lives would be addressed with greater vehemence or the same vehemence, but they're not. But what we have here is every news organization, the whole communication system of the world is dominated by it. And therefore, it is building up a fear in many people, a terror of this, which the vast majority of people who are not elderly and have other health problems are not being affected by this in any way that threatens their life. So we have a situation where if you put it in perspective, the hysteria is exaggerated. And there shouldn't be hysteria anyway, because hysteria means you're not thinking straight. And once you're not thinking straight, when you fall for fear, and when the survival mechanism kicks in, save me, whatever, you are a lamb to the slaughter for the the manipulators, because that's exactly what they're trying to elicit. And by the way, in terms of vitamin C, I'm not telling people what they should do, but I take big doses of vitamin C, and that's what I do. And people will have to make their own mind up what they do.
Well, like we said 2 weeks ago, keep calm. It's very important to keep calm. Yeah.
Keep calm. Keep calm. And there's one other point before we finish, Gaz. This is why the definition of anti-Semitism keeps getting expanded. Of course, the British Labour Party, which it's the Labour Party if they're on their knees, because that's where they spend their time these days. Party of the people, you remember that. You must have a good memory. The expansion of the definition of anti-Semitism to include criticism of Israel, which is now being taken on by American states and imposed on universities, is not to protect Jewish people from discrimination. This cult couldn't care less about Jewish people. That's the point. It's to stop exposure of what it's doing, and even more than that, exposure of its existence and its agenda. And I won't stop, because in my view, the future of human freedom depends on us not stopping, because in its target, in its gun sight, is exactly that, all vestige of human freedom to be deleted.